We heard a bit on Labour's offer to Scotland as the UK leader Sir Keir Starmer made the journey north to announce plans for a publicly owned GB energy company to be based in Scotland. Older viewers may think this comes a bit late. Scottish Oil was originally nationalised under a BNOC headquartered in Glasgow. The British National Oil Company or Corporation was privatised in 1982. Sir Keir also talked of a decade of national renewal with more apprenticeships and more investment in the NHS while not putting up taxes. The SNP have responded by demanding an emergency mini-budget as soon as a new government takes office. They're assuming that government will be led by Sir Keir Starmer. Stephen Flynn, the SNP's outgoing Westminster leader, has denied that GB Energy would in fact create any net increase in jobs. He describes Labour's promised 69,000 energy jobs as a con trick, saying that more jobs would actually be lost in Scotland as GB Energy in fact becomes a drain on Scotland's resources, mainly benefiting the rest of the UK. Labour has also been reported as favouring more private involvement in healthcare. Is that how they aim to increase health provision without putting taxes up? The UK Health spokesperson Wes Streeting has said that Labour will open the door to private health companies. No doubt we'll hear more on this as the campaign continues. We assume that Wes Streeting will be the Health Secretary in any new Labour government. For a Health Secretary for England, that is, of course. We have a mini-series looking at Scotland's 5 elected parties, and that's also on our YouTube pages if you want to have a look at that. We're going through them in alphabetical order. We've so far covered Alba, the Conservatives and the Greens, and next it will be the turn of the Labour Party, followed by Lib Dems and then the SNP. Lastly, in strict alphabetical order. So if you subscribe to our channel, you'll hear when our new shows are coming out. So please look for the subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Next story now. Swint, the Scottish women's international football team, were in action on Friday, and we were there, but we weren't commenting on the match. The game was against the women's team from Israel and was played in an empty Hampden Park. The SFA, worried about disruption from pro-Palestinian protesters, decided not to admit fans from either side. There was plenty of action outside, however. There were protesters, mainly from the pro-Palestinian side, and also small counter-protest from Israel supporters. Maybe tell you about that later on a separate video. Meanwhile, Patrick Harvie, the MSP co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, has demanded that the Scottish Government should stop giving grants to any firms on the UN list of companies linked to Israel. Mr Harvie demanded that the Scottish Government could do more, and he quoted First Minister John Swinney earlier when he said that no company profiting from occupation should profit here in Scotland too. By the way, the Scottish women's football team won the match 4-1. Truth, lies and misinformation. Are we going to get more of all of the above during this election campaign? How do we know our media is reporting on actual facts and not passing on conspiracies? A report last week from the Alan Turing Institute found that 80% of British citizens are fairly or extremely concerned about misinformation from social media. The survey shows that most people have come across what they think to be fake news on social media, although most took no action to complain. Also, 80% of those asked had low levels of trust in the UK government, and around 2/3 felt that the government had tried to mislead them. A majority too had low levels of trust in the mainstream media. Participants in this survey strongly favoured the social media platforms taking action to block anyone guilty of deliberately spreading false information. We at News for Scotland, of course, we're a small but growing part of the media, and we do our best to tell you what's actually happening and not making things up. We will never do that. We support peace in Gaza, we support peace in Ukraine. We also think Scotland should go for independence, and we think the climate crisis is real. We don't expect our viewers to agree with us on everything. That's why we keep the comments section on YouTube open at the bottom of our page here. We always do our best to report in an honest and balanced way. How are we doing? We'd love to hear from you, and so far when we receive comments we usually have time to reply to them all. So it'd be good to hear what you think. Now let's move on to good news from Scotland. Road deaths are down. A newly published report from Transport Scotland shows an 11% fall in the numbers killed in our roads, although that still meant 155 fatalities last year. That number has been falling consistently, as this graph shows. The numbers killed in our roads in 22 was 171. Although fewer people have died on our roads, the total number of injuries has increased to over 5,700 total casualties last year, though most of them are not fatal, of course. The Scottish Government's road safety framework includes a 50% target in the reduction in both fatalities and other serious injuries on the roads by 2030. As this graphic shows, there's 5 ways of getting safer roads, safer road design, safer cars, appropriate speed limits, and of course sensible behaviour by drivers and pedestrians. Now let's look again at the post office story. On Thursday last week, the Scottish Parliament passed law to allow for those wrongly convicted of post office fraud to have their convictions quashed. For decades, it's been clear that the UK Post Office used a faulty IT system provided at great cost by Fujitsu, and this system, called Horizon, had generated false accounting deficits, leading to honest postmasters and sub-postmasters being prosecuted for thefts which didn't actually happen. It's also becoming clear in the ongoing London inquiry that post office managers did nothing to stop these false prosecutions and are actually accused of a cover-up. This week's bill in Parliament, which was prepared quickly, in just 2 weeks, will allow Scottish victims of the Horizon scandal to take part in the UK-wide compensation scheme. Angela Constance, Scotland's Justice Minister, said, "As the UK government's legislation was not extended to cover Scotland, we have worked as quickly as possible to ensure parity for the affected sub-postmasters here, who will also be able to access the UK government's compensation scheme." This unprecedented step of introducing legislation to right this terrible wrong, she said, was necessary to respond to the scale of the scandal and the length of time that victims have waited for justice. Angela Constance continued, "We will now be seeking royal assent for the bill as quickly as possible so affected sub-postmasters can have their convictions quashed. Once this bill is signed into law by the King, those wrongly convicted will be free the following day to apply for compensation." Now let's look at the tourist tax. Have you ever been asked to pay a levy when on holiday and visiting cities in Europe? I have. It's quite common really, but Parliament now last week has backed a new law giving councils the power to introduce a visitor levy should they choose to, and the idea is to raise funding for local visitor facilities and services. The Visitors Levy Scotland Bill will allow local authorities to apply a levy on overnight stays, with all the monies raised being reinvested in services and facilities largely used by tourists and business visitors. Similar levies already apply in tourist destinations across Europe, including Amsterdam and Berlin, and also in other countries outside of Europe, for example in Canada. Councils that want to introduce the visitor levy will be able to do so after they've consulted with local communities, with local businesses and tourism organisations. An 18-month implementation period will then apply before any local authority can introduce the visitor levy scheme in their area. This is to provide adequate time for councils and businesses to put into place the systems needed to collect and administer a levy. An expert group of representatives from the tourism industry, from COSLA and other partners will continue to work together to produce guidance for local authorities putting in place the actual visitor levy scheme. Now we're going to look at a story from a couple of weeks ago in May from the STUC and wealth tax. That's the Scottish Trade Union Congress. Already this general election campaign has brought the argument on to taxes. Will the incoming Labour government change VAT, or will Labour stick to its commitment to not increase income taxes? What is missing from this debate is any mention of wealth. The STUC has argued previously, and there's a paper published on their website, that moving tax away from income towards wealth is actually fairer and would work. Looking recently at the Sunday Times Rich List, the total assets of Scotland's richest people add up to 23 billion. With a levy of just 2%, the Scottish Government could raise 459 million a year from a few extremely wealthy individuals. According to Ros Foyer of the STUC, this sum could pay the wages of 10,000 working people. Is that money well spent? Well, as Foyer argues, this transfer of the 2% would hardly be noticed by the richest 10 families. She said they wouldn't lose a wink of sleep over 2% tax, which they would barely notice, but this money raised would be spent in the economy, helping it and the communities to grow. The SCC believes that Scottish Parliament could vote to bring in a wealth levy and strongly advises the new First Minister John Swinney to get onto it. The full proposals are available online. Look for Raising Taxes to Deliver for Scotland. We'll put a link to that on the comments below. Thanks for staying with me so far. The News for Scotland team is now producing a variety of shows, both longer on YouTube and shorter stories, also on YouTube Shorts and on other platforms like TikTok and Instagram. We're a new not-for-profit media company and started making Scottish news and culture videos just a few weeks ago in April of this year, 2024. We intend to continue growing our audience and making good programmes to a high standard to move Scotland's conversation on. We are looking at the general election in 2026. If you like what we're doing, you can be a big help. First, please look at the like and subscribe buttons below on your YouTube page. And if you want to help us buy more of the digital equipment to make more shows, we are now inviting contributions to our crowdfunder, which is linked below. Any contribution, no matter how small, will help us to be a growing part of Scotland's new media. Thanks. And now on to a story about a US Scottish golf club owner. Donald J. Trump was yesterday found guilty in the New York court of 34 counts of falsifying business records. What's it got to do with us? Well, now that the former US president is a convicted felon, questions are resurfacing about how the Trump organisation bought its Scottish properties in Ayrshire and Aberdeenshire. Scots law has a device called the Unexplained Wealth Order, which can be used by the legal people if they have a suspicion about the source of a business's funds. There was an unsuccessful attempt in 2021 to obtain an Unexplained Wealth Order from Scotland's highest court, the Court of Session, but a Scotsman reported yesterday, on the 31st of May, that the case in New York did use Trump's Scottish assets as part of the evidence against him, so it's possible that a new attempt will be made under Scots law to challenge Trump organisation's business practices here in Scotland. And now to an update on the work of the Galloway screever Susie Briggs, who has several readings and an interview on our YouTube channel. Susie's one-year-long post, supported by Creative Scotland and the National Library of Scotland, is aimed at promoting the use of Scots in the scenic southwest of our country. And next Monday, that's the 3rd of June, Susie will host an online Scots writing workshop based on a theme of hope. This workshop is part of the Scottish Book Trust's project called Scotland's Stories. It's free to log in. The session will last 1 hour and a half, and all written entries will be published online, and the best of these are going to go into a book to be published in Scottish Book Week, which is in November this year. We'll put an Eventbrite link to that session in the comments below. Now, that's it for now, so thanks for watching, and remember please, if you like what we're doing here at News of Scotland, tell us. First, if you click below on the like and subscribe buttons, that would be great, and also if you could chip in a couple of quid to our fundraiser, we can certainly use that. The more money we get, the more shows we get, and the more cool equipment we'll buy. Right, thanks for watching. I'm Hugh, and we'll be back soon with more News for Scotland. It's news where we are.